It was late in the evening when I stepped into Phoenix Corp to start my new job as a night watchman. The air outside was cool and crisp, the promise of an oncoming summer night hanging in the clean city air. I could taste the hint of ozone, remnants of the day's heavy traffic, and the faint hint of something metallic on my tongue. After years of combat, of the chaos and uncertainty of foreign lands, the city felt sterile, clinical, devoid of the smells of earth and nature I had grown accustomed to. Stepping into the building, I exchanged the city's scents for the heavy smell of electronics. The cool air conditioning hit me like a wave, replacing the slightly warmer outside air with a cold, regulated chill. My ears picked up the constant hum of servers, the faint clicking of keys, and the low drone of electricity. The floor was glossy and clean, reflecting the stark white fluorescent lights above. I thought it was odd that they were only hiring military vets. We're not usually a preferred demographic, let's say, but fuck it. They were paying $31 an hour, and there weren't a lot of good options out there for an old vet like me. I wasn't about to start asking questions. My job was easy. Sit in a room and stare at surveillance monitors. The control room was nothing like the command centers I was used to. Instead of sandblasted concrete and the tense murmurs of men and women ready for combat, it was a symphony of low-end whirs and electric hums. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, with no windows and walls lined with flat screens displaying feeds from countless security cameras. The monotone hum of the air conditioning filled the room, a constant, cold whisper. Rows of sleek computer systems hummed softly, their screens casting a dim artificial glow around the room. The sharp scent of electricity filled the air, mixing with the subtle smell of plastic and cold metal. In the corner of the room was a small table. An old coffee machine sat atop it. It was a stark contrast to the high-tech surroundings, an antique relic from a simpler time. I filled a cup, the machine sputtering and groaning as it poured out thick coffee. I took a sip, the stale taste a poor substitute to the fresher brews I was used to, but a necessary tool to combat the stillness and solitude of the long nights ahead. The constant surveillance of empty hallways, silent corridors, and vacant parking lots was a far cry from the adrenaline-soaked life I had left behind. The solitude and silence was a welcome shift from the days of gunfire and bloodshed. Settling into the worn leather chair, I perked myself up for the night, my eyes scanning the numerous monitors. Among the numerous properties Phoenix Corp was tasked with securing, there was one that stood out, an old decommissioned psychiatric hospital, situated on the outskirts of the city, a place that bore the remnants of a different era. It was a stark contrast to the modern skyscrapers and high-tech offices that blinked on my screens, a monument to the city's darker history. The hospital was a massive complex, a grim monolith perched atop a barren hill, imposing and solitary. On the monitors, the place was nothing more than a mass of deep shadows and sharp angles, its faded bricks and peeling paint barely visible under the cold silver moonlight. I'd often find myself entranced by the building, its eeriness captivating. The grounds were vast and desolate, crisscrossed by overgrown paths choked with weeds. The faint rustle of the wind through the dried branches of leafless trees surrounding the hospital was the only sound that ever seemed to breach the silence of the night, a ghostly whisper captured by the microphones embedded in the security cameras. The towering structure was a labyrinth of deserted hallways and long-forgotten rooms. The walls, once white and pristine, were now stained with the passage of time, paint chipping away to reveal the cold, harsh concrete underneath. Unlit corridors stretched out into the darkness, the flickering static of the grainy camera feed giving the deserted passages an eerie, spectral quality. Doors, now unhinged and decaying, hung open, yawning like broken jaws into the obscurity. There was a palpable sense of melancholy that clung to the place, as if the air itself bore the weight of the building's history. I could imagine the cries, the whispered prayers, the desperate pleas echoing through the now empty wards. Despite the physical distance and the separation by screens, I could almost smell the stench of antiseptics mingling with human despair. I could almost taste the metallic tang of fear that must have once permeated the air. An uncomfortable chill ran down my spine as I thought about the many souls who had walked those same corridors, trapped within their minds and the towering walls of the asylum. Rumor among my coworkers was that the hospital was haunted, that there were tormented spirits, unrestful souls who still roamed the derelict building. I dismissed their theories. I had faced the horrors of war, the monstrous capacity of man, and I had no belief in ethereal threats. One unremarkable night, the tranquility of my control room was disrupted by an unexpected anomaly. The monitor linked to the psychiatric hospital flickered abruptly. I watched as the screen momentarily turned to static before the image returned, this time accompanied by an unusual graininess. I felt a tingle and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A drop of cold sweat trickled down my forehead. I shook off my unease, assuming it was a minor technical glitch. But something was different. As I stared at the screen, the normally dead silent feed now held a sound, a soft rustling noise that echoed through the otherwise silent control room. It was as though the microphones embedded in the cameras were picking up the faint whisper of wind that weaved through the desolate building. As my eyes scanned the screen, the camera feed transitioned. The automated system was designed to cycle through various locations of the property, providing a comprehensive view of the entire building. The view shifted from the exterior to the eerie, dimly lit corridors of the hospital. The labyrinthine hallways stretched out, shrouded in an oppressive darkness that seemed to absorb all light. The erratic flicker of the screens cast elongated, shifting shadows along the walls, creating an eerie, almost spectral dance. The echoing silence was suddenly punctuated by the distant creak of a door, an undercurrent of sound that felt unnaturally loud in the vast silence of the control room. My trained ears strained against the low hum of the room's air conditioning, trying to discern any identifiable sounds. But all that came through was the continuous rustling and the occasional creak, sounds that were commonplace for an old, derelict building. I squinted at the screen, my heart pounding. I could feel the taste of anticipation, metallic and sharp, lingering in my mouth. I tried to convince myself that it was a malfunction or a simple fluke in the system, but the gnawing unease refused to recede. The camera moved, panning across an empty hallway. Doors that had been hanging open appeared to move slightly, as if nudged by an unseen force. It felt as if the empty halls of the hospital had come alive, stirring after years of slumber. The whispering sounds coming from the feed grew louder, bouncing off the metal walls of my control room and echoing in my ears. A chill swept across the room. I tightened my grip on the mouse, my knuckles turning white, the smooth plastic cold against my palm. My mind, trained to detect and counter tangible threats, was struggling to make sense of the scenario unfolding on my screens. The unsettling rustling continued, drifting from the speakers like a ghastly melody. I sat there in the semi-darkness of the control room, my eyes riveted to the flickering screen. My mind was a whirl of thoughts, my instincts refusing to settle, as though sensing an imminent threat. And then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a bright flicker of movement on the hospital feed. I turned my attention fully to the monitor. There it was again, a dark shape darting across the end of the hallway before disappearing into the inky shadows. It was swift, a fleeting phantom caught in the grainy black and white feed. My hand involuntarily clenched the mouse tighter. A thin layer of cold sweat had formed on my forehead, trickling down my temples and dampening my collar. I rewound the feed, my fingers moving deftly over the keyboard, the keys cold and rigid right under my touch. I scrutinized the footage again and again, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light or an anomaly in the feed. But no matter how many times I replayed it, the result was the same. A figure, distorted and nebulous, had indeed traversed the gloomy corridor of the forsaken hospital. Even though the room was cool, a sudden hot flash of anxiety washed over me. The monitor's glow, usually mundane and indifferent, now seemed ghastly, casting eerie shadows on my surroundings. As the footage played on a loop, I felt a creeping sense of dread. My fingers tapped on the desk, a rhythmic expression of my mounting anxiety. The whispers of the old building continued to play out from the speakers. It was a soundtrack that filled the room with an eerie resonance. Maybe there is something to these rumors, I thought to myself. I had dismissed them all as mere pranks or products of overactive imaginations, but the chilling imagery on the screen, the figure darting through the dark corridors of the hospital, had shaken my skepticism. Night after night, I found myself returning to my post, the previously familiar control room now transformed into a macabre theater, showcasing horrors that defied explanation. Each night, as the screens flickered to life, the chill of the control room seemed to deepen. I could hear the hum of the electronics, the hiss of static, and the soft, disturbing whispers emanating from the hospital's feed, forming an unsettling orchestra that had thrummed against my senses. Over the coming shifts, I began to see more disturbances on the screen. Dark figures flitting around the corners, doors slamming shut, and objects moving of their own accord. Each incident only served to heighten my terror, causing a shiver to pass through me that no amount of warmth could eradicate. The grainy footage showed a world unseen by the naked eye, a place where the rules of reality seemed to bend and contort into horrifying shapes. One night, as I sat in the dimly lit room, the speaker started emitting a low guttural moan, a wailing sound that seemed to echo from the deepest recesses of the derelict hospital. The sound was bone-chilling, a cry of torment that made my blood run cold. The taste of stale coffee in my mouth turned sour, my heartbeat hammering in a rapid rhythm against my ribs. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to walk away, to leave the job and the haunting sounds and images behind. But I was a soldier, and soldiers don't abandon their post. The taste of fear was bitter, but the taste of cowardice would be unbearable. This was my battlefield now, and these unseen enemies my foes. Even in the relative safety of the control room, I could feel a presence in the room with me. My senses were heightened, my ears straining to catch any unnatural sound, my eyes squinting to discern any movement, either around me or in the static-filled screens. The nights dragged on. Each night I would steel myself for the shift, my body and mind preparing for the onslaught of fear. Night fell with an eerie quiet, a shroud of foreboding that settled over the city as I returned to my post. The hospital feed sprang to life, the decrepit building emerging from the grainy static. Each broken window of the hospital, each decaying door, and every weed-choked path told a story of abandonment and despair. The control room was filled with the familiar chorus of the night, the low hum of the cooling systems, the subtle whirring of the hard drives, and the unsettling sounds from the hospital feed converged into a symphony of terror. The air tasted stale and lifeless. As the night wore on, the spectral manifestations appeared. The figures appeared more frequently, their distorted forms weaving in and out of the shadows with disturbing fluidity. The guttural moans grew louder, the bone-chilling cries echoing throughout the control room with an almost palpable desperation. On the screen, a figure suddenly appeared at the end of the hospital's long corridor. It was more tangible than the others, its form holding a certain solidity that made it seem almost human. It moved with a slow, purposeful gait, its form flickering like a candle in the wind before disappearing into the encroaching darkness. I strained my eyes, trying to discern more details about the figure, but the screen's harsh glow and the camera's grainy feed offered little assistance. The following night, as I settled into the cold, worn-out leather chair, I noticed a difference in the feed. The usual static seemed to part, giving way to a clearer image. The hallway, typically shrouded in darkness and mystery, was illuminated with an ethereal glow, the source of which I could not discern. And then I saw it. The figure I had seen days prior, the one with a presence so tangible that it silenced the whispering shadows, emerged. It moved slowly, emerging from the depths of the shadow-drenched corridor. Its form was clearer this time, no longer just a wisp of darkness. It was tall and cloaked in what seemed like a hospital gown, its face obscured by the glaring light behind it. The cold taste of dread in my mouth turned sharp, the icy tendrils of fear snaking down my spine. Suddenly, the figure stopped, its form quivering in the grainy footage. I leaned in closer, my breath hitching in my chest as it seemed to turn, facing the camera directly. I could see nothing of its face, just a shadowy void, but I felt an intense gaze piercing through the screen, a silent acknowledgement of my presence. I continued to stare at the figure on the screen. I felt an inexplicable connection, an unseen thread linking us through the digital medium. Each pixelated movement of the figure sent waves of terror crashing over me, the horrifying sight holding me captive. The sound of my own breathing echoed in the room. Just as abruptly as it had appeared, the figure turned and retreated back into the shadows, its form melting away into the consuming darkness. I sat back in my chair, my body heavy with dread. The familiar confines of the control room felt alien. Despite the fear, I couldn't tear my gaze away from the screen. My body was rooted in place, waiting for the figure to reappear from the inky darkness of the hospital corridor. The figure's appearance had disturbed me. Its haunting visage lingered in my mind long after my shift ended, its elusive form imprinted on my retinas, staining my dreams with its haunted presence. The next night, I arrived at my post earlier than usual. As I settled into my chair, the artificial coolness of the room seeped into my clothes, chilling me to the bone. I took a deep breath, the sharp, sterile smell of electronics mixed with my own anxiety filling my nostrils. I fired up the system, the usual hum of electronics and gentle glow of the monitor seeming louder and brighter than before. The static on the hospital feed filled the room with a ghostly whisper, the black and white images of the empty corridors appearing one by one on the screens. The hours crawled by, but the figure failed to make an appearance. Yet the anticipation of its emergence was agonizing torture in itself. Each whisper that emanated from the speakers, each shadow that moved across the hospital corridors, heightened my anxiety. And then it happened. Around the same time as the previous night, the familiar ethereal glow filled the hallway, and the figure emerged from the shadows, its form even more defined than before. It wore a tattered hospital gown, its edges fluttering gently as it moved down the corridor. Its face, however, remained featureless. As it moved closer to the screen, I could almost make out more details. Its silhouette seemed broad-shouldered, its gait firm yet purposeful. A wave of fear ran down my spine as it stopped, turning its faceless visage towards the camera once again. It seemed to stare at me. My mind raced, a flurry of thoughts clouding my senses. Who was this entity? What was its story? How was it tied to the haunted corridors of the decommissioned hospital? The more I thought about it, the more questions surfaced. The figure retreated into the shadows once again, leaving the corridor in a pall of spectral whispers and an ethereal glow. I sat there, my heart pounding, my skin icy with sweat. The figure had added a new layer to the horror. Despite my trepidation, a part of me was drawn to the spectral figure. Its tortured existence in the abandoned hospital was a dark reflection of my own lonely vigil in the control room. It was trapped in its spectral world, just as I was trapped in my high-tech cage. As my shift wore on, the figure would retreat back into the darkness, leaving the hospital's haunted hallways empty once again. The whispered chorus would return, filling the silence with their murmurs. Then, the control room would regain its normalcy, the screens returning to their routine surveillance, and the bitter taste of reality would wash over me. The figure was more than just a terrifying apparition. It was a puzzle, a mystery wrapped in questions. Something changed the next night. As the figure emerged from the darkness, there was a palpable shift in the air. The figure moved with purpose, its faceless head turning towards the camera more frequently. Its form flickered with an unsettling energy, the static around it intensifying. The usual whispering chorus fell into a haunting silence. The entire hospital seemed to hold its ethereal breath. Then, in a shocking moment, the figure stopped. Its form shivered in the grainy footage. Without warning, it raised its hand, pointing directly at the camera. The air in the control room seemed to drop several degrees. The figure was not just acknowledging my presence, but reaching out. This chilling realization sent waves of terror crashing over me. My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white under the pressure. As abruptly as it had appeared, the figure dissipated, its form disintegrating into a flurry of static. The ethereal glow faded, leaving the abandoned hospital corridor in darkness. The whispering chorus did not return, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. As the sun began to break over the horizon, I sat in the cold control room, shaken by the night's events. The metallic taste of fear still lingered in my mouth, the smell of cold sweat permeating the air. The smooth, cool surface of the desk beneath my fingers was a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded on the screens. I went to stand up and found that I couldn't. I looked down at my legs in shock. My feet were gone. My legs were fading into what seemed like television static. The being wasn't trying to communicate with me. It was indoctrinating me into its terrifying environment. I struggled to maintain my grip on reality as the static consumed me inch by inch. Instinctually, I knew what it was. My body was being pulled through into the realm of the haunted hospital. Panic rose within me, threatening to overwhelm me completely. Then, a voice, soft and lifting, like a mother's lullaby. It seemed to come from all around me, wrapping me in its eerie embrace. It said, "Welcome home."